Out-of-body experiences. Unpacked. Part 1. This is the first video of a set of 3, which I originally made for an online study group. They explore the work of academic researchers focused on the fascinating subject of near-death and out-of-body experiences.
Near-death experiences, which are NDEs, are a subset of the so-called out-of-body experiences, which is the OOBEs, of course, in which a person has a subjective impression of perceiving things from a standpoint outside of his or her physical body. And that's what it's all about. So let's continue.
You could say these type of experiences can be roughly divided into 2 categories. 1, the observations of the subject's physical environment from an out-of-body standpoint, and 2, experiences of other realms, transcendental or otherwise. So let's look at some classic examples. In 1977, there's a patient of Dr. Micheal Sabom based at the University of Florida. The patient was a 52-year-old night watchman who had suffered a big heart attack. Now, Dr. Sabom gave the following account of his patient's experiences when he was out. I was sitting up there somewhere where I could look down in the room. I noticed the floor was black and white tiles. I recognized myself down there, my body sort of curled up in a half-fetal position. They strapped my legs and they really whacked the head out of me. When he came back with his fist, it was way behind his head and he hit me right in the center of the chest. They shoved a plastic tube like in an oil can and they kind of did all this stuff. I could see my right ear at the side of my face because I was facing away. I could hear the guys talking. There was there's all kinds of instruments. They put a needle in me, like one of those Aztec Indian rituals they put in a virgin's heart. They thumped me and I didn't respond. They thumped me again. It seemed like giving my body too much voltage. My body just jumped 2 feet in the table. Note that the night watchman had no medical experience. But the most striking feature of the story is that the patient's account closely matches his medical report. Yet when most of these events occurred, his heart was stopped and his brain was not being supplied with oxygen. Under these circumstances, how could his brain store memories of these events? Of course, one might say it's possible the patient consciously or subconsciously concocted it. But to test for that, Sabom interviewed 32 patients reporting near-death experiences. He compared their accounts with the stories of 25 patients who had similar medical backgrounds but did not report an NDE. All of them had been admitted to a coronary care unit and all had considerable exposure as laypersons to medical terminology and procedures involving heart disease. Sabom asked that the people reporting the NDEs to describe their own recitation from heart attack, and he also asked the 25 control patients to describe in physical detail about what happens during that procedure. The people who were the controls, 20 of them made a major error, even though they felt reasonably confident they were correct. Out of the 32 patients who reported the NDEs, 26 gave general physical descriptions without the details, but without errors also. The remaining 6 patients gave accounts which were realistic in all respects, with details. Sabom points out that the procedures during the CPR may be omitted in a particular case. Therefore, it cannot be argued that this patient was simply taking the standard account. There were specific descriptions for each individual case. For example, in another of the 6 cases, electric shocks were administered. In this case, it was exactly what the patient reported. One possibility is that the heart attack victim is in a semi-conscious state and is able to directly observe. However, Sabom points out that some involved events that the patient wouldn't have witnessed with his eyes, or couldn't have. Some persons reporting NDEs make stronger claims of remembering the conversations held in adjoining rooms or other events occurring outside the range of their sense organs. Kimberly Clark, a hospital social worker in Seattle, Washington, reported a striking example. Clark went to see a coronary patient named Maria just after she had been revived from cardiac arrest. Maria reported an NDE in which she was initially looking down from the ceiling at the doctors and nurses, Later, however, she experienced travelling outside of the hospital building in an out-of-body state and noticing an old tennis shoe on a third-floor ledge. At her request, Clark went looking for the shoe in an effort to see whether or not it was real. After looking and looking, she did find the shoe on the ledge, and it was exactly matched Maria's descriptions. She commented that the only way she could have had such a perspective is if she was floating right outside in very close range to the tennis shoe. Parapsychologists have run experiments in which subjects tried to enter an out-of-body state and influence events at a distance. The Swedish psychiatrist Niels Jacobson gave an example of this type of story. Two persons, Jacob and Eva, had agreed to attempt an out-of-body meeting. They described the outcome as follows. Jacob: "Then I transported myself astrally to her home and found her sitting on the sofa reading something. I was calling her name and I was also driving my car. She looked up and saw me. After that I left her and was back in the car which I had been driving." Eva: "I was sitting alone in the room in an easy chair. Suddenly I saw Jacob sitting in front of me in the car. I saw about half the car, as if I were in it with him. I only saw the upper part of his body. I also saw the clock in his car." In this case, Jacob clearly didn't travel to Eva's room in a half an astral car. His mind may have transmitted information to her in this way. Some part of his subconscious mind was evidently paying attention to the road as he was driving. Jacob's perception of Eva in her room seems to fall somewhere between the accounts of remote viewing and accounts of OBEs. From this, it's not clear whether he experienced astral travel, as many, of course, OBEs do. But anyhow, at this point I also wanted to bring attention to a number of books by Robert Monroe, who has claimed to be an experienced person in astral travel. I recommend reading some of his books. It describes many experiences that he does outside of the body, and again adds weight to the subject matter. At first glance, visual perception of many OBEs and NDEs seem to take place from a particular point of view. It appears as though the subject is observing through a pair of non-physical eyes that float around in 3D space. However, a close examination of near-death cases show that what is actually happening is a kind of omnidirectional awareness that is much more remarkable than ordinary vision. The psychologist Kenneth Ring and his student Sharon Cooper undertook this study to see whether or not people who are blind report being able to see in NDEs. And this area is particularly interesting if you're dealing with people who are blind from birth. Those people generally have no idea what it's like to see, and of course lack visual experiences in their dreams. Ring and Cooper's study involved 14 people who were blind from birth. He also studied 6 people with severely impaired vision and 11 who lost their vision at a young age. They found that blind people do report being able to see in an out-of-body state, and the content of their NDEs does not appear to depend on whether they're blind from birth or blinded later in life or whatever. Overall, 25 students in the study, 80%, claimed to be able to see during an NDE or OBE. And often, the visual perception among the blind is common in these experiences and is often clear and detailed. One of the study's subjects was Brad Burrows, who was blind from birth. He recalled an NDE at the age of 8. His heart stopped, and he said he felt himself lifting up from the bed and floating through the room towards the ceiling. He saw his blind roommate get up from bed and leave the room to get help. His roommate later confirmed this. Brad then found himself rapidly going upwards for the ceiling of the building until he was above the roof. At this point he could see clearly. Brad could see snow everywhere, except for the streets which had been ploughed, though they were still slushy. He was able to give a very detailed description of the way the snow looked. And this was a blind person. After this, Brad had a typical experience of passing through a tunnel into a beautiful world filled with brilliant light and celestial music. There he encountered an unknown man who emanated overwhelming love. All this imagery was unusual since, as mentioned, he was completely blind from birth. Thanks for watching, and please share with others. Part 2 will be put online just 2 weeks after this video was.